not just from Auckland today, where he's based, but actually literally flew the plane from LA yesterday as an Air New Zealand pilot to get to Auckland to get to be with us here today. So our next speaker is a pilot. He is an adventurer and an author and a motivational speaker that's very well known and well recognised for his work around resilience. It's been a real pleasure connecting with Mike Allsop in advance of today's conference, and I know we're very excited about his contribution this afternoon. It was a personal recommendation by a couple of people actually. So there's a couple of people, my brother Jamie, who insisted when we consulted him that Mike would be the person to finish the Aspire conference off on a high note, and of course someone who's very known to you all, who has trekked in Nepal with Mike, which is Meg Matthews, who unfortunately had another commitment here today. So I borrowed her insights for the introduction. So Meg said, Mike is an absolute legend in the Khumbu Valley of Nepal. There is a photo of him with Sir Edmund Hillary featuring on the wall or window of literally every tea house. When you're trekking with him around the village, it's like walking with the Pope. Everyone wants to kiss his hands and come up and greet him. He has given huge amounts back to the people there in the community as a philanthropist and has many stories to tell, including even returning a yeti, the skull and hand of a yeti, back to the community. So Meg was fortunate to be a part of one of his expeditions over to Nepal, and is very gutted that she couldn't be here today. So we thank Meg for providing that personal anecdote and introduction, and in doing so I'll now pass the time over, and if you'd like to join me in giving a warm whakatū welcome to our final keynote speaker for the day, Mike Allsop.
Man vs. Wild star Bear Grylls calls him a regular family man faced with some very irregular adventures. But Bear has only half of it when it comes to describing Mike Allsop. Kids Can ambassador, international airline pilot, and best-selling author. Mike Allsop brings to that rare breed of men who not only successfully conquered Mount Everest, he scaled the world's highest peak without the help of a guide. Having inspired thousands of people all over the world, from classrooms to boardrooms, in the United Kingdom, the USA, Australia and throughout New Zealand. Mike brings his own unique brand of determination and drive to help people stay on track and conquer their own Everests. In addition to his numerous philanthropic trips to the Himalayas, Mike is also a worthy ambassador for both Kids Can and Hyundai's Young Leader Development Program, Pinnacle. As an award-winning best-selling author and guest on numerous TV shows in both New Zealand and around the world, Mike is one of only 2 people ever to have completed an incredibly unique pair of adventures. He climbed Mount Everest and accomplished the unimaginable feat of finishing 7 marathons in 7 days on 7 continents. If anything, however, Mike considers his family his greatest and most humbling achievement. While Dad Mike is a world record holder himself for completing the highest altitude marathon of any human being, his teachings and philosophies of building a strong plan and never give up have clearly rubbed off on his kids, who have achieved world records in their own rights whilst on expeditions with Dad. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage a man who practices what he preaches, airline pilot, adventurer, and very, very proud dad, Mike Allsop.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's really nice to be here. Just for a couple of moments, I'd like every single person in the room, I'd like you to imagine that you are a pilot. I want you to imagine that you are flying a small 21-seater aircraft. It's called a de Havilland Twin Otter. You're the co-pilot or the first officer, so you're sitting in the right-hand seat. You've got your 5-point harness on. The control column's just in front of you. And as you sit there, you look around the cockpit, it's nighttime. So all the little instruments have their lights shining on them. And as you look out from where you're sitting, out through your cockpit window, all you can see is pitch black ocean and pitch black sky. You can't actually see where the two meet, it's that dark. And you're about to crash into that ocean. You're 200 miles off the coast of Hawaii. You have 3 hours of fuel behind you. And you're just 60 minutes, just less than an hour from safety. But you can't access any more fuel because you have a fuel malfunction. Just for a moment, imagine how terrifying that would be. You've said the 3 words that no pilot ever wants to say, which is Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. The Americans have scrambled 2 F-15 fighters to come out and get you, but they can't change your situation. And as you sit there in that seat, a very somber thought comes through your mind. A fact that over 350 aircraft have gone down off that coast, over 1,000 people have vanished, and no one has ever survived that far out. And you're about to go into that ocean. Just for a moment, imagine what you'd be feeling, what thoughts would be going through your mind. So that was quite a while ago, and I was working for a little company called Great Barrier Airlines. Anyone heard of those guys? Yeah, they're really good now, don't worry, there's nothing wrong. And it was my job with 2 other pilots, so it's 3 of us in total, to fly up to America, up to a place called Arkansas, Oklahoma, and we picked up the aircraft and we flew it across America, went over to San Francisco, and we dropped it off at Oakland Airport, where the American engineers tanked the aircraft. And what they did is they pulled all the seats out of the airplane and they put 5 huge stainless steel tanks inside the aircraft, because this airplane had to fly about 1,600 miles, and it was only designed to fly 400, so that's the reason for these extra fuel tanks. All the proper checks were done. The American engineers signed it out, the FAA checked it, our engineers were supervising it, all the flow checks were done. We tested it as we were supposed to test it. We got airborne. I remember getting airborne in that aircraft, and as we were flying out through the Golden Bay of San Francisco, Alcatraz sort of went past, and then in the distance there was the Golden Gate Bridge, and we sort of flew in between the span and set heading with the sun setting on this adventure of a lifetime. We got past halfway, and we had already checked each tank was running normally, and it was, and we started balancing the tanks. We burnt a large tank to the ground. By the time we got to one of the rear tanks, it just stopped flowing. It got about halfway and then just wouldn't produce any more fuel for us. I got out of the co-pilot seat and I crawled across the top, and I cut the fuel lines at the back of this tank because it wasn't doing anything, and I started transferring fuel into these huge 3-gallon drink bottles that we had, and I was putting it into the front tank because that had drained. But we couldn't keep up with the demand of the engines. We really couldn't. And I remember the skipper, his name was Al, and he looked down the aisle of the aircraft, and he shouted at me, he goes, "Mike, we're running on fumes. We're going to go in." And I shouted back, I said, "Al, I've just dipped the tanks. I've literally dipped the tanks, and we've got 3 hours of fuel." He says, "We're not getting it." And I remember I had to make this decision, and I don't think of myself as an overly brave person, but I had to make a decision where I was going to go in this accident. And so I had this thing which was sort of temporary courage, really, and I got up, and if I'd thought about it, I wouldn't have done it, and I crawled across the tanks, and I sat into the seat, in the co-pilot seat, and I sat down, I strapped myself in. I looked at Al and said, "I'm staying here," and he goes, "Mike, it only needs one of us. Go down the back. We've already talked about this." And it was a bit of an argument, and I said, "Look, I've got to do one thing. I've got to write a note," and it's a bit weird. I've got to write a note to my girlfriend. And I started writing this note, and then I put it down my underpants. And he looked at me and he goes, "That's a bit weird." And I said, "Yeah." I said, "Look," and it was really somber. I said, "Al, if they find," it's pretty serious, "if they find my body, they're going to find my last words to her." And he goes, "That's a good idea, Mike. You fly so I can do the same," because we didn't have an autopilot. So I start flying, and Al's sitting there, he's got his pen and he starts writing. And he sort of looks up and he screws up his face and he goes, "Oh, what did you write in your note?" And we sort of laughed, and then things got really serious really quickly. We were running on, initially shut down an engine just to stay in the air long enough for the Americans to come along. And if you're going to crash anywhere, crash in America. They've got amazing equipment. They sent out 2 F-15 fighters, a C-130 Hercules, and they vectored a battleship to relay comms for us as well. But none of that could change. And I remember being really frightened, and my hands were just shaking. And the only thing that brought me any comfort was to focus on the basics. I remember saying to myself, just focus on the basics, Mike, of flying, which I did. And we have this thing called a Q&H setting, an altimeter setting, and it's set at sea level. And that's what we base everything. And it changes every day, so you've got to change it. And because I'd focused on the basics, I asked the Coast Guard to give us a Q&H setting. And the Coast Guard in this Hercules, the C-130, was flying next to us, and I just saw it pitch down to about 25 degrees nose down, flew straight down to the water, leveled off at 50 feet, came back and formatted on us. And he said, your altimeter settings, this, we've adjusted it, and this is what it is, which is really good. We knew where we were in terms of altitude. Then both engines flamed out, and we started to glide. The Coast Guard had pulled in front of us, and they were dropping flares out the back onto the water because, as you can imagine, it's just pitch black. It's like standing close to one of these curtains trying to see where the horizon is, and you need the horizon to control the aircraft, especially if you're trying to land. And so they started dropping these flares. In the meantime, we swapped over to another tank, managed to start both engines, but that tank was showing less fuel than the one that had just run out, so things were getting really dire. We came down behind this Hercules. I pulled the window down, and it was a short field and takeoff landing aircraft, so we were probably doing about 120 knots, which is maybe sort of 140 miles an hour, and I could put my head just out inside the slipstream, and I could see the water, and I would wave Alistair down, and we got so close to the water, and Alistair, when I looked, was just looking at his instruments, looking at my hand, just checking forward, not even looking outside. And as I waved him down, we got so close to that water I could smell it, and I could smell the salt. And it was pitch black and absolutely terrifying. And I looked at Al, and I said, we've got to do it, Al, we've got no choice. And he goes, Mike, I know. And I said, Al, close the thrust levers. And he did. And as he closed the thrust levers, the aircraft hit the water, and we sort of just went straight into the back of a huge wave, a big 3-metre swell, because we couldn't see it. Everything went in slow motion, and just to tell you a little bit about the impact, the aircraft hit the water, the nose got driven into the water, and the tail was sticking straight up, and that's where it stayed. But in the cockpit, I had a 25G seat that snapped, crushed me into the control column. It shredded all my clothes off me. It shredded my jeans and my belt, locked my jaw back. I got crushed in the control column. It broke my ribs down the bottom here, and I remember swallowing water, trying to scrabble to get out. And then it's really strange. A really calm thought came into my mind, and I wasn't frightened, and I don't know why I wasn't frightened. And the thought was, if I just take a huge breath of water into my lungs, I'll be at peace. Which to this day, I don't know why I wasn't frightened. And I just relaxed, and I went to take this huge breath, and right at that microsecond, the aircraft bobbed out of water, and there was a couple of inches left of the cockpit, and we both put our lips to the ceiling and took a huge breath. The doors are snapped off, the engines are sort of started to come into the cockpit. That's what normally happens with those high-wing aircraft. The engines come in and kill the pilots. I think because my seat had gone forward a bit, that's why the part of the propeller missed me. Jumped out. If there's any engineers around in here, the gas turbine engine was operating at about 700 degrees Celsius, and it went to 19 degrees Celsius, so the turbine blades were firing off like a shotgun. Started swimming around, and as I was swimming, I remember I would swim, and then this arm would be just completely dead, like it wouldn't move. And I remember looking at it, and it was just floppy, and I remember thinking, oh no, I've severed the nerves, because there's so much adrenaline pumping through you wouldn't know. And then I looked at my watch. If I pushed my watch, and everyone's watch goes to about here, my watch, done up with the clasp up, was blown past this joint. It was stuck underneath my armpit. So that was the forces inside the cockpit. So I grabbed it, broke it. There was good news. I still had underpants, which was fantastic. So I swam around. We got into a life raft. The Americans dropped another 3 life rafts, got into those, we strapped them together, and they were flying over us. And then after there was a lot of blood in the bottom of the life raft, and all our hands and our feet were all cut up. And then after about sort of 45 minutes or an hour, we saw a light on the distance, and we found a torch, and we signalled, and it signalled back. And this huge container ship. Has anyone been close to a container ship? There's one in the harbour here when you see it. The one we were on was a bit bigger than that one. The side of them is about 100 feet high. And this thing pulls up, and they throw a little rope ladder over the side, and they put a tender over, and the tender comes out, picks us up, takes us back, and the tender would go away from the container ship and slam into the side. And they said, whatever you do, grab the rope ladder and climb as fast as you can, otherwise the tender will come back and kill you. I remember looking at it, I'm looking up, and it's just rocking back and forth, and it just disappears into the darkness. I remember thinking, you've got to be kidding, I'm not going to get killed in my underpants at this stage, there's no way. So I grabbed it, and I flew up the rope ladder, and I sort of got to the top and climbed over, and then I collapsed onto the deck, and I was just lying there trying to push myself up, because I was pretty exhausted at this stage, and I was in shock, and I was shaking. And this shiny pair of shoes appeared in front of my face. And this guy picks me up, and as he lifts me up, he was the first mate of the ship, and he holds onto my shoulders, and he looks at me and he goes, "Welcome to the Columbus, Canada. Where are you from?" And he was German. And I looked, and I said, "Oh, thank you so much for rescuing us. I'm from New Zealand." And you could see the pause in his brain, and he goes, "You're a Kiwi. We've rescued heaps of you Kiwis." And they took us down to their desalination plant, and they had a really good decontamination plant. They washed us because we lost all the skin off us, or I had, because of transferring fuel, and it had burnt me. And then they took us up, and there's all these plaques from these New Zealand ships that they had rescued. And as Kiwis, man, we get out and give it a good go, I tell you. So I came home from that, and I went round to my mum's house, and my mum's a really wise old lady. She's a psychotherapist, or she was then, she's retired now. She still looked at me and she said a couple of things. She goes, "Mike," she goes, I know you're going to fly, and if you go flying again and you have another little event or something happens and you're not scared, then because you think you're too cool because you crashed this airplane, survived, you've got post-traumatic stress. You need to come and see me. It's really serious, and I'll get you some help," which is really good advice. And then she said, "You're a mess. Go and have a bath." And I wasn't living at home, so I went in. And I remember I filled that bath to the brim, and I sat there and I got into it, and just my face was sticking out, and it was one of those 1970s pink Art Deco baths, right? Only New Zealand people know that bath. And I sat there with my face sticking out, and that was the first time I just absolutely dreamt unreservedly of a life that I wanted to live. And I wanted a life full of adventure and full of passion and to make the most of my life. And without a shadow of a doubt, that was a crossroads of my life. And I'm really lucky that's gone a really good way. So today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share with you some of my stories about some of my adventures, but not just the stories of the adventure, how I go about doing it, and how I go about doing it as a normal type of person. I've got a regular full-time job. I'm a pilot with Air New Zealand. I fly the 777, love it. It's a fantastic company to work for. I've got an awesome family. My wife, she's incredible. Her name's Wendy. 3 kids. One's just turned 20. He's the only one at home. I've got a 21-year-old and a 23-year-old as well. Anyone got kids that age? Yeah, it's heaps. That's quite a cool age. They still need a dad, but they're just going out into the world, and it's great. But somehow, I've managed to overcome some really big challenges to do some really cool things. And I want to share with you, I want to be brave enough to share with you some of my ideas and my tools. And it's a little bit like, social media these days, everyone's telling you what to do, and we're all individuals. There's no one stop fits everybody. So what I'd like you to do is just listen to the tools, draw some parallels with your lives, and it might generate some ideas with goals and things that are important to you, because not everybody wants to climb Mount Everest. So we get stuck into it. So came back from that adventure, managed to get into Air New Zealand, and I was flying all around the world. I was on the 747, so I was going up to London and across to Japan, Los Angeles. After about a year, I sort of got lost. Couldn't put my finger on it. My little mojo had gone. I wasn't getting out of bed with my pants on fire, wanting to be a pilot anymore. I'd done it, right? And so I thought, yeah, and I just couldn't put my finger on it. So I thought, right, I need some goals. So I'm going to run a marathon. I failed. I didn't even get to the start line. I thought, that's a bit strange. And so then I thought, right, I'll do the coast to coast. Really cool adventure. And I made one phone call to a kayak club and failed. So I took a step back and I realised I wasn't passionate about those things. And they didn't really drive me. I wasn't going to bed dreaming about them. So how do you find your passions and your goals? I didn't know. In those days, there was no internet, right? It was just starting and you couldn't really surf it. It was more for emails. So I started reading lots and lots of books. And I started reading all of Hemingway's books. You guys heard of Ernest Hemingway? You know, great author, a great adventurer of the 20th century. He ran with the bulls in Spain. Anyone run with the bulls? I was a couple. It's a really stupid idea, eh? It's a really stupid idea. So I went around with the bulls. I took Wendy, got onto the arena where the bull plays with you, and then I almost got gored. So and then I jumped out of the arena, and then the Spanish young guys held me above the head and threw me back in like a rag doll, laughing. But I managed to get out, and I came back to New Zealand, and I was really excited. And I read Hemingway's next book, and he didn't run with the bulls. He only watched. So you've got to be careful. But so the next adventure is I read about Hemingway on Kilimanjaro. So I went up to Kilimanjaro, didn't book anything, turned up at the base of the mountain, and I got someone to take me to the summit for about $500. And all of a sudden, here's little old Mike Allsop that grew up in Titirangi, West Auckland, with a solo mum. My dad left when I was about 10. I never saw him again, which is really sad. And all of a sudden, here am I doing these world-class adventures like Hemingway. And my belief changed. And that was the biggest thing, is my belief in myself changed. So I started reading more and more books, and I got more and more into things. And I found that I really loved adventure, and I started getting into climbing and mountaineering. I went down to Aspiring Guides in the Southern Alps, in Wanaka, and they turned me into a really strong, competent mountaineer. And after about 8 years of climbing all over the world, I had enough experience to attempt to climb Mount Everest on an unguided expedition. I've got a clip to show. So on Everest, I had my climbing axe, and I normally bring it away, but they don't like it at security. And so that was my super tool, and that's what I used. And without it, I couldn't climb Everest. This is one of my super tools. And if you're going to remember anything, I have 3 of these tools that I use. I put a deadline in the sand, and I make it real. And I put a date on what I want to do, and I write it down, and now I'm a bit more confident in myself. I tell a few people that I trust, but once I put that time to it, my subconscious thinks I'm going. It doesn't matter if you don't go when you say you're going to go. You can always change it and go another time, but it's extremely powerful. It really is, from your subconscious point of view. Now, I wanted to make sure that when I was standing up talking to people, I was doing what I actually talk about. So I had a bucket list a couple of years ago, and one day I was going to ride an old Royal Enfield across the Himalayas. But one day never comes around unless you put a time on it. So I put a date on it. Now, does anybody ride motorcycles here? Yeah, a couple. So I'd never ridden a bike. My mum wouldn't let me, and I was in my late 40s when I hopped on a motorcycle. So I went and did it properly, went and got some lessons, went over to the Himalayas, had a guide on a motorcycle. We had a mechanic in a van that he would drive behind us, and all the bits that would fall off, he'd pick up, and then he'd weld on at night time. And then we got all the way up to the highest road, and we had a little tiny problem. Anyone see the problem? So that's the 8th highest mountain in the world, just in the background there. And I was the first guy. I don't know why they sent me first. Putting that deadline in the sand makes it real, and your subconscious is so powerful. So this is what Everest looks like, and it's a metaphor for life, really. You can't go to the summit. You go all the way to base camp. It took me 8 years to get to base camp, really. And then you rest for a week, and then you go through the ice fall up to Camp 1, and then you come down and you rest for another week. And then you go do a second cycle all the way up to Camp 2, and then you another week's rest, and then you do a third cycle up to Camp 3. The most dangerous part is obviously the ice fall, but this big shoulder here is the western shoulder of Everest, and that's what avalanches across the ice fall. That's what hurt the Sherpas in 2014, where 16 of them were killed. So before you go anywhere, you go and you get a blessing from this chap. His name's Lama Gershi. And he's a really awesome person, and he escaped from Tibet in 1950, and he came across the Himalayas with the Dalai Lama, and the Dalai Lama carried on to Darjeeling, and then Lama Gershi ended up in Pangboche, just across the border. Spent a bit of time with him, and he said to me, he goes, Mike, He goes, if everyone in the world just gave a little bit more than they take, the world's a much better place. And I like that. And he said to me, he said, there's lots of people running around trying to be Sir Edmund. He said, there's only one Sir Edmund. He said, but you don't need to do that. Just give a little bit more than you take. So I like doing interesting things. I wonder if you can see Meg Matthews. She's sitting at the back. I think that's her with the hat on the top there. I like doing interesting things. So this is a replica Yeti skull and a Yeti hand. Now, Yeti is an abominable snowman, and I don't know if I believe it's an abominable snowman, but there's something in the Himalayas that stands on its back legs and is about 8 to 12 feet tall and scares the Sherpas. There's no doubt about it, whether it's a bear or whatever. And in this monastery had these real artifacts, and they got stolen in the 90s. And when they got stolen, it took away their little income. So I managed to get Weta Workshop to make some replicas, and I took them up. But can anyone see the problem in the room, the huge problem? The look on that guy's face, he thinks I'm the thief bringing them back because they brought me bad juju. So it took us quite a whole afternoon to convince him that we were just trying to do something nice for the community. And he emailed me. He went and found an email. He had to walk 2 days to find an email. And he emailed me. He said, Mike, you're very kind to the community. Everyone is coming up to Pengbache to see these artifacts that you've made. But we have another problem. Some wild Tibetans have come across the Himalayas and have destroyed one of our stupas. And we need 600 kilos of cement to fix it. The nearest road is 350 miles away. And he wanted 600 kilos of cement. But if anyone's in sales, you are more than welcome to use his sales pitch. He wrote at the bottom, if you or any of your friends help us with this project, I will guarantee you will have a great next life. So I wrote to all my mates, I said, hey, I'm selling bags of cement. They're 100 US a bag, and you're guaranteed to have a great next life. And we helicoptered him all the cement for his stupa. So then you go up to base camp, and then you wait for the blessing that you see on TV. But this was going to take a while. The Lama was booked up for about 5 or 6 days. So we decided that we would go into the icefall, which was crazy, and we would just have a look around. And we went in for about 6 hours in the icefall. And then I got to this point, and there's people here. And this is just nuts. We don't climb like this in the Southern Alps or the French Alps or anywhere else, but on Everest, you take these massive risks. So I was like, right, that's it. I'm going to turn around, I'm coming back. And I walked across a very flat area, and it was called the football field. And it's probably about the size of this room without the stands in here. And there was a whole lot of crevasses that ran across. And then I heard this whoomph. And I knew what it was. It was that serac that you can see peeled off. And it was the size of a hotel. And it just formed this massive ice avalanche. And I had two choices, this fight or flight. And I unclipped from the safety lines, and I ran, and I jumped the crevasses, and then they're only so wide, and I got to quite a big one. And I was trying to decide whether to jump into it to get away from the shockwave. And I turned around and I froze. And then right at that particular moment, the avalanche came over a ridge and then went down, and it hit a ridge at sort of a oblique angle, and then came up. And it just lightly dusted us. The whole place was just shaking to bits. And for some bizarre reason, I took a photo. These are the people you just saw. This is where we ran down. So I came back. I went back in to base camp and said, I'm not going anywhere till I get a blessing, and waited another week for a blessing. So it brings me to my first pillar is I allow myself to dream. I have the courage to dream. I don't journal every day, but I've got all these little books that I write ideas down. And when you have the courage to dream, one idea generates something else. You're very lucky if you get your nugget of gold straight away, but that idea generates something else, and then your gold nugget is way over here. And that's where your passion lies, and that's where you find your purpose. But if you don't have the courage to dream in the first place, you're never going to find it. So once I've sort of know what I want to do, then I build myself a really strong plan. It's got to be your plan, not someone else's. You know, there's no one shop fits all sort of thing, one shoe fits all. It's got to be your individual plan. And what I like doing is I like building my base camp. And I think of it like this. I like seeing my goal, and I've got a dream board, and I've got a mind map here. And this is my oldest son when he was about 16, wanting to climb Kilimanjaro with me. And I break it down into small parts because everyone gets overwhelmed. Everyone gets overwhelmed. And you can sit back and just look at it. And when you get overwhelmed, you can go to a tiny part on the side, and you find this magic thing called momentum. And then off you go. It's really powerful. This sort of sits just around the corner in our kitchen, and especially with young teenagers, we can change it and motivate them a bit, and it's a really, really good technique to actually keep you on track. So back on Everest, we're going to be jumping on and off Everest a little bit. This is the Western Combe. It was about minus 10 degrees, wasn't that cold, but at 20,000 feet. And a friend of mine was walking and he didn't have anything covering his face, and the reflective heat off the snow actually sunburnt his tongue and it blistered and it swelled up and gave him some breathing problems. So it's an incredibly harsh environment. Brings me to my next tool. It's visualizing the obstacles and how you're going to overcome them. A really awesome triathlete at work. She's a part-time flight attendant and a sort of more or less a full-time athlete. She said to me, "Are you visualizing, Mike?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm visualizing myself coming home safely." And she said, "Can I teach you something?" And so what she taught me to do was to sit down and to imagine myself having one or two serious problems on the mountain, like being caught in a whiteout because I was climbing on my own because I didn't have a guide, or seeing people left on the mountain. And then I'd sit there and I'd imagine myself having these problems, and then once I could feel the emotion welling up inside me, I'd stand up, change my state, and visualize myself handling these situations in a really positive manner. And what she had done is she had taught me how to trick my subconscious into already dealing with these. So when I got lost in a whiteout, I'll just go back a slide, in the Western Combe there, it was terrifying, but I'd already visualized this as a problem, so I didn't panic. I already knew what I was going to do. It's a very, very powerful tool. I've seen this used in a really interesting way as well in businesses where they play war games and they visualize the opposition. And they have maybe 10 or 12 tables, and they have 10 people at a table. I've seen it done a couple of times. It's really cool. And then all the employees turn up and they go in there and they sit at a table, and there's an envelope. And in the envelope is their opposition. And everyone's got to be the opposition, and it might have different branches or different companies or different real estate agencies, whatever. And then they open it up. It's just all the public information inside these, and then they start playing, and they start playing ferociously for like a little trophy or a bottle of wine. And the adjudicator sets the environment, says, right, here's the economic situation at the moment, etc. Go, come up with a strategy, and this is what I want you to do. They do it, and then they come up with these ideas, and then they have a leaders board, and it's really, really powerful way to generate some ideas. And then what happens is they declare a winner, they all go for lunch, and they've all fought really hard, and they all come back in as that company, and this has generated so many ideas for them. It really is. It's a very, very, very neat trick. So, back on Everest, this is the yellow band that was sitting on the ocean floor. And when India is now being pushed under the Asian continent and pushing the Himalayas up, this sits at about 25,000 feet. People have found little tiny fossils in this space here. I was too tired to look for fossils, so I took a photo. Now, once you get to Camp 4, you're on oxygen 100% of the time, right? And I remember this photograph, and I was really frightened. And I remember thinking about some of my mistakes in my life. And I've had some whoppers. I could do a 2-hour talk on all my mistakes and my failures. But the thing is, they don't have to be your failures. As pilots, we do this really, really well. We spend a whole day, once a year, sitting in the classroom studying other people's failures so that we don't make the same mistake. So on Everest, I read every book there was to Everest, and the stack was about that high, and I wrote in the back why people failed, and I came up with a really clear understanding of why everyone fails. But studying people's failures is a bit morbid sometimes, so I went back and I thought about every single individual book again, and I wrote down why people succeeded, and it gave me a really clear indication of how to succeed on Everest. One of the big things is punctuality. You put a boot on, and you strap it up, and it's sort of 3 or 4 layers. It's got batteries in it and all sorts. And you get it on, and it takes you about 10 minutes. You're exhausted, and you look down. You're really proud of it, and you have another look, and it's on the wrong foot. And so I was getting ready really early. I got ready at about 8 o'clock at night, and we were leaving at about 10 in the evening. And there was a little shake on the tent, and I hear this little voice going, "Hey, Mikey, let's go." It was my Sherpa, and I came out of my tent, and I stood up, and I zipped my tent up, and I turned around, and Lakpa was standing there, and Lakpa would have been about 5 foot nothing, and he looked up at me, and he was 10 times stronger than me. He was carrying 4 bottles of oxygen. I was just carrying my one. And he looks up and he goes, "Come on, Mikey, let's go. We're going to climb Everest." And so we started trekking, just walking, and then it gets really steep really quickly, and you kick one foot hit your axe, you climb up. Then you're totally exhausted, you can't move. And then take 4 or 5 breaths, do it again. And I sort of got myself in quite a good rhythm, and then something out of the corner of my eye caught my attention, and it was a person sitting on a rock. And then I looked back, and I realised that they had been there for 10 years, and I knew them. And they had his bag on his head, and he was just sort of lying there, and it was Scott Fisher out of the book Into Thin Air. And I remember getting really frightened because I was thinking about the mess he left for his family, and I had a really young family at home. And tears started welling up in my eyes, and then something clicked, and I'd been visualising this as an obstacle, and I was just going to stop. And I stopped, and I thought about where I was, because you could fall off really easy. I'm clipped into the mountain, and I took a step, another step, and carried on. The dawn comes up, and then it goes from about minus 40 to probably minus 45 to about minus 40. But the psychological side of it is huge. And this is the Knife Edge Ridge. On your right-hand side, it's about an 8,000 foot drop, and on your left-hand side, it's about a 6,000 foot drop. And for some really odd reason, you're scared of the right side, the Tibetan side, not the Nepalese side. The result's the same if you fell off. And I've got some... So I flew along the ridge. I'm just in the red there. That's me. Lakpa's right behind me. And when I got to the Hillary step, I climbed up. There's some people coming down. So Lakpa stayed down the bottom and he sort of waved me on. So I started walking. And then Everest sort of shallows off, and it's quite a nice walk for about 40 minutes to the summit. And I remember walking, and I got really close to those rocks at the top. And then everything changed. I started to get really disorientated, and I started to stagger. And then I collapsed onto one knee, and I had my axe. I'm pushing my axe, and I just slumped into the snow. And I remember trying to sit up, and then my vision, all the colour went out of my vision, and my vision started doing this. And I remember consciously thinking, wow, 45 people have vanished on that ridge alone. I'm about to vanish. This is what it's like. And my vision went like this, and then I felt this tap on my shoulder, and it was Lakpa. And he knew exactly what happened. I'd run out of oxygen. And he changed my bottle and saved my life. It wasn't for him, I'd still be sitting there. And he helped me up. The oxygen sort of hit me. It makes a little difference, about 3,000 or 4,000 feet. It's not a hell of a lot. And then gave me a big hug and said thanks. We came around the corner, and there was no one there. It was just Lakpa and I at the summit. And I remember tears welling up from my eyes. I remember feeling a tear trickle down underneath my goggle on my cheek, and then I felt it freeze. And then I remember thinking, there's no space for emotion. You have worked so hard for this, but if you cry, your eyeballs are going to freeze and then you're stuffed. And then I turned around to Lakpa and I said, we're taking a couple of photos and we do a phone call and we're gone, Lakpa. And then I took the last couple of steps and stood on the summit. I really liked that photo because I'm not standing there triumphant. I'm so frightened and so humbled to be standing there. I literally backed onto that summit, and I stood there and went, Lakpa, take the photo. And he took his gloves off in about minus 50 degrees Celsius to get that photo for me, which is amazing. The other thing is I like those boots because I turned up to Everest and I didn't have any boots. I had $500 left over, cash. That was all I had. And I put it on the mortgage and no more money. And I had no boots. And I was going to buy boots in Kathmandu, and they were $500. But I forgot about my Sherpa tip. And I wanted to give him $500, which is a really good tip in those days. And I just think it's quite a funny Kiwi thing to do. You turn up to Everest on your own with no boots and no money, and then you're still going to make the summit. The other thing is people say to me, what it's like to conquer Everest. And I was lucky enough to see Sir Edmund before he passed away. And I took this photo to him, and I showed him, and I asked him that about people saying I conquered Everest. And I never forget it, he was sitting next to his fire, and he was in a leather chair, and he has whiskey. And he put his whiskey down, and he sort of shuffled forward on his chair, and he put his glasses on the end of his nose, and he looked at me, and he goes, Mike, you do know the only thing we conquered was ourselves, eh? And I thought, yeah, you're right, Sir Edmund, you really are. So I had been telling myself over and over and over again, just like this, I am going from Camp 4 to the summit, and then all the way down to base camp. I just say it like that. I'm going Camp 4, summit, all the way down. It's totally impossible, but my subconscious doesn't know that. So when I got back to Camp 4, there was another independent climber. He'd done a fantastic job of freezing his toes. And this is really great science because we're made up of about 80% or 70 or 80% water. And when you freeze water, it expands. So the cells and the muscle and all that sort of stuff and the tissue, it all dies. And it got a little worse, and then it finally got clapped off. Oh, I'm supposed to say graphic warning. Graphic warning. You guys had lunch, you're fine. And he's a friend of mine, he's really cool, and he's in England, and every time we go and see him, it's 2 pints of beer and then his toe comes out in the pub. Brings me to this, which is my second super tool, and it's basic brilliance. Everyone on the team does the basics brilliantly. And what it does is it builds you this spare capacity, this spare resilience, especially in times of change. You know, if you do the basics brilliant, you build this capacity. As airline pilots, every single day we're at work, we do an emergency briefing before we take off. We do briefings in the cruise. We do a briefing every time we change pilots when we're international, and we do a briefing before we land. So if something happens, we have this spare capacity that we can build on as well. I have it in my own personal life as well. I have my 4 pillars of health, which are food, movement, sleep, and mindset. And if one of those is out, if I just go back to the basics, that really helps me as well. What are your basics? What are your basics in your personal lives? And what are your basics in your business lives? And does everybody on the team do those basics brilliantly? Great time to talk about Wendy. She's my rock. She married me knowing that I was going to climb Everest. We had kids knowing I was going to climb Everest, and she never tried to change me, which is pretty incredible. And she came out to pick me up in this photo, and I'd lost 9 kilos in 11 days. I was a mess. And I was really excited about it because I had a job opportunity on Everest the next year. And just before this photo, I'd said to her, hey, I've got this job opportunity. I can climb Everest as a guide next year, as a pseudo guide. She said to me the smartest thing anyone's ever said. She goes, Mike, if you need to climb Everest again, don't worry, we will find a way. She didn't mean it at all. What she was doing was giving me space to work out myself. Was the most important thing, wasn't the mountain, and my kids need a dad more than I need to go and climb dangerous mountains, but the most important thing was the people. So it was her idea. Every time one of our kids turned 7, it was a rite of passage. I took them on their own, just the 2 of us, just dad and the son, going up to Sea Everest. We trekked about 100 kilometres. You can't drag a kid that far. We just went one step at a time, village by village, and we stayed with the Sherpas. I've taken all 3 of them individually when they turned 7. It was their rite of passage. And we've gone back as a whole family, which is really cool. Just a side note, my kids talk more about the tree hut that we made in the back of the house that we slept in and that broke and fell down than they do about going to see Everest with Dad. So you don't have to go and see Everest with Dad. Like, I'm not a great dad because I took my kids to see Everest. I'm a good dad because I spent a bit of time with them like that. That's the big thing to remember. But it's a good time to talk about Wendy because she's got her own mountains. You've got to have your own mountains, not somebody else's. Her mountains, like I'm 0 star, she's 5 star. So her mountains are completely different to mine. Her mountains are Mount Hilton, Mount Sheraton, Mount Shangri-La. She loves Scottish whiskey, single malt whiskey. She loves European history. So her adventures, as she goes off to Scotland, her brother lives there and she travels all around. You've got to have your own adventures, your own dreams and goals, not somebody else's. So I came back from that adventure and I just relaxed. I knew what to do. I just started dreaming. I just started reading lots and lots of books, and I read a book by Sir Ranulph Fiennes. Have you guys heard of him? Awesome adventurer, and he wrote a book, Mad, Bad and Dangerous to Know. And in that book he ran 7 marathons on 7 continents in 7 days, and I was like, that's me, I'm doing that. This is how powerful when you believe in yourself, you can do anything, nothing will stop you. And so I got myself a logo, got myself a website, I even got myself a sponsor. I mean, have we got any runners or ex-runners in here? So there's quite a few, right? How hard can running be? Seriously, that's what I thought. This was my hero when I was growing up. Rod Dixon, and they run the 1983 Boston Marathon. And I went out pretending I was Rod Dixon. I puffed my chest out, and off I went. And then I ran 5K and everything fell apart. My knees hurt, my back hurt, and I hobbled home. And I'd gone from Rod Dixon to the guy on the ground behind Rod Dixon, really. But I wasn't worried. I went into my study and I had on a big board, a big mind map, and I'd broken it down and I looked at it. Well, I sort of went like that. And I looked at it And it just showed me how to become a really good runner. And it was Google, YouTube. And then I learned how to run off YouTube. And pretty soon, I turned into this chap, and I could run really good distances, really slowly. I didn't have to do it fast. And the idea was 7 marathons in 7 days on 7 continents. I'd be the 3rd guy in the world to ever do it. And I was running for a cause greater than oneself. So I was running for Kids Can New Zealand. And I got running one marathon, the thought of running another one was just overwhelming, let alone getting on an aeroplane. But I was really lucky. I had a really awesome team behind me, and it just gave me the opportunity just to focus on the moment I was in, whether it was putting on my skins or eating my nutrition and just doing the basics really, really well, knowing that my team had my back. And then I would find my momentum, and then off I went. I managed to complete it, came back, made some really good money for Kids Can New Zealand. This brings me to my last pillar, probably my most important one. It's about never, ever, ever giving up. And I honestly feel if you don't give up, as long as you're always moving towards your goal, one step at a time, you can't fail because you're always going towards it. It doesn't matter if it takes you 5 years or 10 years. And I've got an example of this. I made the classic Kiwi mistake. I overtrained because I was frightened I was going to fail. I told the whole world that I was going to run 7 marathons in 7 days and 7 continents. And I'm on the phone to the National Business Review giving an interview, and I turn around and Wendy's sitting on the doorstep and she's on the phone to the surgeon, and I had a pain in my back and she's crying, and I was like, well, what's going on? And I put a stress fracture in my lower spine because I'd overtrained and I hadn't done it properly. I hadn't done the basics well. I should have got a coach. So everything was off, completely failed, and we lost $32,000 worth of airfares and all that sort of stuff because we didn't have any insurance. And I kept saying to myself, I don't have to do this now. As long as I don't give up, I can't fail. And it brought me to this principle. I'd just taken 80, 100 steps backwards, but just 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, just always moving. I gave myself about 8 months, drank some beers with my friends, talked about it. My back, found my mojo again, fell in love with running, off I went. Now, I couldn't wait for everything to be perfect. Everybody waits for something to be perfect. And so I put a deadline in the sand, and I was going on that day no matter what. Brings me to this. You can't be afraid to fail. The fear of failure has killed more dreams than failure has, because people just don't start. And I see this a lot, I really do, especially in the mountains. Now, I've got a beautiful example of this. This is my daughter, Maya. So when the kids turn 7, they get to, this compulsory, they've got to come see Everest with Dad. When they turn 14, they get to choose an adventure. It has to be outside the limits of what's possible, what they think's possible. It's got to be crazy. It's got to be safe, so Wendy's got to approve it. And it has to be good for your community. So Maya came to me and she goes, Dad, I want to go to Everest Base Camp with you. And I said, well, you'll get to base camp. Go and think of something really crazy. And so she came back with a photograph of a lake next to Everest. And she said, Dad, why don't we take 2 stand-up paddleboards all the way to Everest Base Camp? We'll pump them up. One's a rescue board, one's a board. And she goes, I'll paddle the world's highest lake. I'm like, that's crazy. She goes, it's supposed to be. I said, how are we going to get the paddleboards through customs? She goes, just tell them we're going on holiday in Thailand afterwards. So I went, okay, that's a tick. How are we going to get the paddleboards up to base camp? She goes, Dad, you've got lots of friends. They've all got yaks. And so we put them on yaks. Off we went. We didn't even know whether this lake existed. Can you imagine the conversations with she was 14 at the time, a 14-year-old girl around not being afraid to fail. And we found the lake, pumped up the boards, pushed her out into the lake, and off she went. And she's got a little unofficial Guinness World Record for the world's highest stand-up paddleboard. Now it brings me to my final super tool. And you heard me talk about this right at the beginning, about momentary courage. You know, and it's taken me about 20 years to put this into really good text. You don't have to be brave all the time, just the courage to take that first step. And I call it momentary courage. It's a moment that changes your life. If you wait for everything to be perfect, and you all know this because you're all successful yourselves, you can't wait for everything to be perfect. Sometimes you just need that moment, take that first step, and just off you go. And then momentum will carry you. It really will. So here's all my 3 pillars. To turn your dreams into reality, you've got to build your plan, not someone else's. And the most important thing is the never, ever, ever giving up. Here's all my tools here. If anybody wants this, I'm really easy to get hold of. Just get me on Instagram or send me a note. You can find me pretty easy. I can send you these slides. There really is. The 3 most important things down the bottom: deadline in the sand, tricks your subconscious into making it real. It really does. Basic brilliance. Everybody on the team does the basics, and they do the basics brilliantly. And the last one, momentary courage. Just the courage to take that first step. So, to close off, there I was with my oldest son, Ethan, on Kilimanjaro. He came up with this really good idea that he was going to climb Kilimanjaro with his dad, and he wrote to the Guinness Book of World Records and said, "This is what I'm going to do, what's available?" Which is quite clever, because they came back and they said to him, if you have a game of Guess Who on the summit and you film it and you do it twice and you get some statements, it's a Guinness World Record. Which was amazing, because he could leverage television coverage, what I did for him, on 7 Sharp. We had 2 7-minute slots on 7 Sharp, which was fantastic for his charity, which was the Auckland City Mission. So off we went. It's pretty similar to Everest in some ways. You spend probably a week acclimatising. You go up to high camp at sort of just before midnight. There was a shake on the tent, and my friend Ndemi, the Tanzanian guide, says, "Come on, boys, let's go. We're going." And we started trekking. It's just a trek, but it's very, very hard, and you're going back and forth on the switchbacks. And then Ethan stopped, and he had a glass of water, a sip of water, and then he vomited. And I know that's altitude sickness. And so I looked at Ndemi and I said, "We're going down." And Ndemi said to me, he said, "Mike," he goes, "trust me." He said, "I've taken 2,000 people to the summit, haven't lost anybody. Just let him trek, let him go. He'll probably feel better. If he feels nauseous, we're going to go down straight away, but just wait and see." So he trekked, said, "How you going, Ethan?" He goes, "Good, Dad, I feel just tired." I said, "We can handle tired, keep going." We got to the crater rim, because Kilimanjaro is a big volcano, and we came up one side, and he was sitting on a rock, and he had his head sort of, hand on his head, and the sun was shining on him. And I remember being so proud of him, because it's so hard. And he got up and we started walking. You can literally see the summit. It's about 20 minutes away. And after about 10 minutes, he slumped into the snow and he vomited again. This had been his dream for a number of years. You've got to have your own dreams, not somebody else's. And for us, we had a really strong plan to get us down really safely with some really good guides. And to turn your dreams into your realities, you've got to build your own plan, not somebody else's. And lastly, I'll never forget it, I picked him up, I gave him a big hug, and I said, "Mate, I'm so proud of you. This is our summit, we're going down now." And I'll never forget it. He pushed my arm out of the way and he just walked off, and he goes, "I'm never giving up, Dad." And then he walked off and went to the summit. You never, ever give up on what's important to you, on your dreams and goals, and go out and conquer your mountains. Thank you very much, everybody.